Unusual, understated, but most of all, undaunted. Behind me is one of the most extraordinary British aircraft that contributed to the early Royal Air Force campaigns of the Second World War. This is Unsung Heroes, and this is the often untold story of the Boulton-Paul Defiant. The story of the Defiant begins in the very early 1930s, 1933 to be exact, when the Air Ministry sent forth specifications for heavy fighter bomber destroyers. Now, Boulton-Paul submitted two proposals. These cumbersome and ungainly designs would be refined, resulting in 1936 the P-82, the Defiant as we know it. Now, Boulton-Paul already had an ace up their sleeve. They were the first to innovate powered turrets into an airframe in the form of the Overstrand bomber. Now, H.A. Pop Hughes, the brilliant armament designer, was instrumental in this innovation and firmly placed Boulton-Paul on the map in terms of cutting-edge technology. Now, not long after all of this, a French company, SAM, approached Boulton-Paul with a powered turret of their own. Unlike Boulton-Paul's pneumatic design, the French turret was electrically operated and a far more advanced design overall. Now, after securing Air Ministry approval, John Dudley North, chief designer at Boulton-Paul, had the manufacturing rights to the second half of this unique puzzle, the turret that would be eventually mated with P-82. By April 1937, with the war looming on the horizon, the P-82, officially named Defiant, was slowly taking shape at the Penderford factory. The prototype Defiant K3810 was initially completed without the trademark turret. In the meantime, the SAM-designed turret had also been tested in an Overstrand, and when the aircraft and turret were finally united in early 1938, trials had revealed that overall performances and meeting required parameters were not quite up to scratch. Even so, maximum speed and altitude requirements were remarkably similar to the Hawker Hurricane. Not a bad achievement given the 370-kilogram weight of the turret and gunner. So, what exactly makes the Defiant, or as the crews would fondly refer to it, the Daffy? Well, let's have a closer look. The Defiant was the first Boulton-Paul aircraft to have an all-metal construction, and in many respects shares the rugged, hefty appearance of the Hawker Hurricane.
Although the Defiant was not designed with guns in the wings were fairly thick and robust, and conceivably could have space for them. As mentioned, this was Boulton-Paul's first foray into an all-metal construction, and the wings, like the fuselage, were of a stressed skin design. Now, the strength of the wings would be invaluable for the Defiant's later roles, given that the wings could be fitted with racks for bombs. The Defiant instead would use this space to carry life-saving equipment in its air-sea rescue role.
The mighty Rolls-Royce Merlin III, the workhorse that powered the two legends of the Battle of Britain, the Spitfire and the Hurricane, also was to be found in the Defiant. Now, the Mark II would lead to an improved engine, the Merlin 20, and the Mark II but also had other refinements along the airframe. Now, an unavoidable quirk of having a gun turret behind the pilot was the placing of a radio mast on the upper fuselage. That's going to be rather tricky. Therefore, the Defiant was quite unusual in having the aerial underneath the fuselage. In order to provide sufficient clearance and avoid damage on takeoff and landing, the mast was telescopic and retracted into the lower fuselage. And here we have the central feature of the Defiant, the electrically operated gun turret. The Defiant firepower is projected entirely from here, and the 4 Browning 303s were thought to be adequate in bringing down enemy bombers. Now, it was from here that the partnership between pilot and gunner had to be crystallized. Effective teamwork needed to be expertly honed, and accordingly, the airframe around the turret accommodated this superbly. Now, if you look closely, you'll notice the retractable fairings, which gave the Defiant its beautiful clean lines. Now, this enabled the turret to move 360 degrees. Now, contrary to popular misconception, the Defiant was capable of firing the guns forward. However, the guns would be locked in the forward position, and the gunner would then set the master switch to pilot. Now, the pilot would then be able to fire the guns, as can be seen here, from the firing button on the spade grip, just as on a Spitfire or Hurricane. However, the guns would be limited to no less than 22 degrees above the horizontal in order to clear the propeller arc. With practice, a skilled pilot could maneuver the aircraft to allow as many guns to bear on a target, factoring the elevation handicap. Accordingly, there is no gun sight in the cockpit. Due to Boulton-Paul's tendency to tinker and improve, it should come as no surprise to you that experiments were carried out and trials with the turret modified for a 20mm Hispano. It was in July of 1939 that these trials were carried out. Now, although they were not successful, it demonstrated the ability and the innovation of Boulton-Paul to maximize the potential of the Defiant.
The Hispano-armed Defiant was by no means last of Boulton-Paul's experimentation with cannon. Indeed, the P-88 was a further study to adhere to an Air Ministry specification for a cannon-armed fighter, although that too would not progress further. As will be discussed later, J.D. North would attempt to relieve Fighter Command's losses with the P-94, which even included a 4-cannoned proposal. Even though this was not approved, it was not the end of Boulton-Paul and cannons. J.D. North had tried to persuade Lord Beaverbrook, the influential Minister of Aircraft Production, to consider the P-94. Although rejected, Beaverbrook understood the technical expertise and experience that Boulton-Paul had with their Hispano and turret innovations. Consequently, J.D. North was sequestered to iron out the numerous issues that were plaguing the Air Ministry at the time with the Hispano. You can find out more about these issues in our early cannon-armed Spitfires video, with an in-depth explanation from Jonathan Ferguson of the Royal Armouries. The link is in the description. At the secret Road Research Establishment facility, Boulton-Paul were able to devise various means of testing the Hispano to ascertain exactly what the problems were and how they could be corrected. Since conventional ground trials would not be useful, a model was made to test out simulating the movements of an aircraft at speed. This would then progress to a Hispano attached to a lorry body, which would then spin with centrifugal force across a specially constructed rig known as the Silodrome. These tests were critical to develop the various improved components that would enable the Hispano design for widespread usage. Now that we've had a good look at the features of the aircraft, what was the overall function of the Defiant, and how had that changed from the original Air Ministry specifications? Well, this actually ties in precisely with why the Defiant has been so misunderstood in the annals of history. As stated previously, the concept of the bomber-destroyer had evolved rapidly in the few years leading to the outbreak of war. As the Spanish Civil War demonstrated, bombers were vulnerable to intercepting fighters. Yet the idea was retained that a turreted fighter would be able to intercept bomber squadrons, still presumed to be flying without escort, and defeat them. With the outbreak of war, it would be the Battle of France before the squadron equipped with Defiance No. 264 would finally be pitted against the enemy. Stationed at Duxford, a patrol of Defiance, joined by 6 Spitfires from No. 66 Squadron, brought down a Junkers Ju-88 over the Netherlands. Now, because circumstances of the original purpose had evolved so rapidly, the Defiant crews had to quickly devise strategies to best utilize its weaponry and its performance in the face of the latest advancements from the enemy. Squadron leader Philip Hunter would be instrumental in devising these tactics, part of which consisted of multiple Defiants in a line flying within protracted turning circles to allow as many guns to bear on their targets. Now, whilst also making it very difficult to target the Defiants in turn. This strategy paid off on the 28th of May, when 10 of 264 Squadron's Defiants were set upon by a mass of 27 Messerschmitt Bf-109s, a faster and more manoeuvrable opponent. 6 Bf-109s were shot down for the loss of only 3 Defiants, as per the combat report for that day. Squadron leader Hunter and 12 Defiants patrolled Dunkirk, Calais. Early in the patrol, the squadron encountered 27 Me-109s, and in the ensuing engagements, 6 Me-109s were shot down, and 3 Defiants were lost. 3 parachutes were seen descending into the sea. The missing were Acting Flight Lieutenant Whitehouse, pilot officers MacLeod, Scott and Hatfield, Sergeant Daisley, and leading aircraftman Revel. As such, this would lead to what is undoubtedly the greatest day in the annals of the Defiant's operational history. May 29th, in the midst of the Dunkirk evacuation, the Defiants of 264 Squadron proved their worth again. Only this time it would be an embarrassment of riches. Amidst all the pandemonium of aircraft buzzing all around, Hunter's tactics were deployed, and 37 enemy planes were claimed, as the combat report for that day puts it. Squadron leader Hunter and 12 Defiants patrolled Dunkirk, Calais, in conjunction with 3 Hurricane squadrons. We were detailed to look for enemy bombers, with one of the Hurricane squadrons leaving the remainder to engage the fighters. The squadron was, however, attacked first by 6 Me-109s, 2 of which were destroyed, and after the squadron had reformed, it was attacked by 21 Me-110s. 15 of the enemy were shot down, and also a Ju-87, which was brought down by Sergeant Thorne and leading aircraftman Barker, who were momentarily detached from the squadron. Pilot Officer K's machine was badly damaged by an Me-109, and his gunner, leading aircraftman Jones, bailed out and his turret was hit. Pilot Officer K successfully landed his machine at Manston. In the evening, the squadron made a second patrol and engaged about 40 Ju-87s and 3 Ju-88s, which were bombing Dunkirk. 18 Ju-87s were destroyed and 1 Ju-88. Sergeant Thorne's machine was very badly damaged and had to land with 1 wheel stuck down. As can be seen on that incredible engagement, 1 Defiant crew became an ace in one day. Flight Lieutenant Nicholas Cook and Corporal Albert Lippett shot down 5 Stuka dive bombers. Perhaps the most famous of all the Defiant crews were Flight Sergeant Edward Fawn and leading aircraftman Frederick Barker. Now these two would eventually become the most prolific of the Defiant aces, with a total of 13 kills. This Defiant, you can see here, has been restored to that of Thorne and Barker's aircraft, L7005. Now, although the Battle of France was a lost cause, and the Defiant had fought so bravely and so well, it was in the Battle of Britain that the Defiant's less popular reputation has been cemented in the history books. Given the situations it had been forced into, particularly with defending airfields from marauding fighters, when ultimately it was the bomber force it was intended to intercept, it's little wonder that the Defiant suffered the losses it did. To confound matters, 141 Squadron, who fought so bravely, did not have sufficient time to employ the strategies or techniques emphasised by Hunter or the rest of 264 Squadron. Although there were only a few engagements, the reputational damage had been done, and the Defiant was no longer a frontline daytime aircraft. Even so, Boulton Paul attempted to alleviate the losses of Fighter Command with a proposal, the P-94, essentially a turretless Defiant with 12 Browning 303s and an impressive performance. The prototype Defiant K3810 was configured for such potential, but this eventually amounted to nothing because the Air Ministry rejected the proposal. Spitfire and Hurricane production would be sufficient. Which brings us to the next chapter of the Defiant story, and perhaps its last hurrah, its role as a night fighter. Now, contrary to popular myth, the Defiant wasn't adapted as a night fighter post facto. The original specification had always factored in the use for nighttime operations, with slight modifications such as a flame dampener for the exhaust, removing the pilot's armour plate and painting the aircraft in a very attractive and distinctive all-black scheme. The aircraft was ready for tackling the bombers during the Blitz. And unlike only 2 squadrons fielded during the Battle of Britain, eventually night-fighting Defiants would be equipping 8 squadrons, including the famous Polish crewed 307 Squadron. The legendary Defiant duo Thorne and Barker would rack up their tally further in nighttime operations. And new crews would establish themselves as night fighter aces. The Defiant would be further refined with air intercept radar and the more powerful Rolls-Royce Merlin 20. Although air interception with radar was still rather challenging, by this point also the Luftwaffe bombing raids were thinning. Despite all of this, the Defiant shot down more enemy aircraft during the Blitz than its contemporaries. The winding down of the night fighting duties of the Defiant and its replacement by a newer aircraft, for example the Bristol Beaufighter, freed up some Defiants for some more unusual duties. One of these was radar countermeasures and the exploits of moonshine. Now, moonshine was designed to deceive the German Freya radar units along the French coast. And in one operation, 9 Defiants were able to trick the Freya units into believing that a much larger force of Royal Air Force aircraft were in the vicinity. Now, accordingly, the Luftwaffe scrambled almost 30 aircraft to intercept them. Now, by fooling the Luftwaffe, the Royal Air Force had the means to divert enemy forces away from genuine raiding formations. And over time, of course, the Germans would improve their radar network, and the moonshine, well, its usefulness, it would wane. But the concept was tested and used operationally, yes, you guessed it, by the Defiant, and the Defiant was at the forefront of its success. Now, at this point, the aircraft's obsolescence was becoming more apparent, and by now, the venerable Daffy was relegated to air-sea rescue operations, important in themselves, it has to be said. The Defiant would do air-sea rescue operations for the Dieppe operation. But in time, this too would be taken away from the Daffy as other Royal Air Force aircraft became available. And the last major use of the Defiant was as a target tug. The turret, the most iconic and important aspect of the Defiant, would be removed. Defanged, the aircraft would be merely a utility to train future pilots and gunners, although this would see worldwide deployments with the Fleet Requirements Units of the Royal Navy. The Defiant would linger on for a long time in the target tug role, well until the late 1940s, with India operating the last target tug Defiants.
Thus, the Defiant has often been unfairly maligned over the passage of time. Its failures have been highlighted over its exploits. But what is most overlooked is this. The Defiant was designed and built for a specific purpose: to hunt and destroy enemy bombers. Yet, despite all of this, the statistics themselves paint the true story of the aircraft. Its kill-loss ratio during the Battle of France and the Battle of Britain was better than all its contemporaries. Although it was used against enemy fighters, it was the use of specific tactics that would enable success repeatedly. Now, this was often not possible to be deployed, and that was sadly seen with 141 Squadron during the Battle of Britain. But as a night fighter, the pilot-gunner combination, its results, it demonstrated the original specification, as previously mentioned, outshone all the other night fighters during the Blitz. And yet, despite being called into situations in which the aircraft was wholly disadvantaged, the crews of the Defiants, they displayed their exemplary heroism. And it really is that legacy that the Defiant should be best remembered. Hey, I really hope you enjoyed the Defiant video. Thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to click and subscribe and follow us, that would be very much appreciated. Now, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Dave Brocklehurst MBE here at the Kent Battle of Britain Museum. It is a fantastic collection. It is the heart and the soul and the spirit of the story of the Battle of Britain today in the United Kingdom. So my advice to you is to get yourself down here and to visit. Thank you once again. And from the Kent Battle of Britain Museum, take care and look after yourself.